Good Friday. Welcome to the Friday Tom's Hardware Show. We are here finally to talk about the Ryzen 9 7950X3D with Paul. He's done some additional benchmarking over the last few days. Nothing super critical, but he's been a busy man.
That's right. Yes, always around these NDAs.
And hopefully he won't have to run off and deal with a school lockdown this show.
Yes.
All right, so what do we want to say? Let's get right into it. We've got the 7950X3D, beauteous, in the new AM5 socket. Differences between this and the regular 7950X. Paul, walk us through it.
So the big thing here is AMD is using their 3D V-cache technology, which is where they stack a additional chiplet of L3 cache on top of the processor. The 7950X3D comes with two CCDs, and one of those has some cache stacked on top of that. Now, AMD has used this technology to great effect with its 5800X3D, its previous gen, or first gen rather, X3D processor. And as we know, it boosts games tremendously in games that benefit from having a lot more cache. And there are some trade-offs, especially in application performance. But with AMD's this time around with the 7950X3D, there's a little bit of complexity because instead of having just one chiplet, they have two, and only one has the cache. So they need to make sure that the games land on that cache chiplet. And I mean, so far, it looks like it's actually a really good implementation of it, that it does it, though there are some lingering questions about the impacts of how they're doing this and how this impacts performance in multitasking. But by and large, for the most part, in our observations, especially if you're just gaming and you're focused on gaming, this is absolutely the fastest chip that money can buy. Of course, that will vary with title, but we'll get into that a little bit.
So there's a whitelist of games that are supposed to run on the stacked cache chiplet, right?
Correct. So
do we have like a list of what's in the whitelist?
So how this works is AMD is using the whitelist from Xbox. The Xbox game bar, that is a component of Windows, it detects games, and it's designed to detect games, and then it toggles on and off what is called game mode. It works with game mode, excuse me. Once you have game mode on, then what happens is the Xbox game bar detects the games automatically when you're using them. AMD has a new driver, a new chipset driver, and a bunch of different services. There are like 3 of them that will run on your computer in the background. They're all very super duper lightweight. And what they do is they hook into the game bar's list. There's a KGL. It's called a known good list of games. And then whenever the Xbox bar detects that, it turns on game mode. When game mode comes on, bam, AMD's chipset driver uses that information to do any number of different things. What it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, this game is going to run on this chiplet. Okay. And then depending upon the power mode you're in, if you're using AMD's balanced mode, not only is it going to try to constrict that game to that chiplet, it will also park the cores on the other chiplet. And this, by doing that, by parking the cores, they're essentially shutting off half the processor. And as we've seen with a bunch of AMD's previous gen multi-die chips like Threadripper, they've had real problems when there's a whole bunch of games or all of the chiplets are enabled. So by turning it off, it boosts performance even further. And that is how they do it. Now, they say that some games will be locked to the other chiplet based on, like, if it prefers frequency. But as far as I can tell right now, all of the games, or at least the ones that I have tested, are being locked to the cache chiplet. And overall, I think that the overwhelming majority of games that will benefit from this technology are going to be, of course, better on the altered cache chiplet. So,
yeah, the times where the non-cache chiplet is your better choice is probably pretty restricted and limited.
Correct. Yes. Some games will price frequency more than L3 cache capacity. And AMD has said that in those cases, it will target that. But this is kind of a work in progress. So we'll see how that goes as they move forward. But it absolutely does target workloads at one CCD, or the little compute chiplet, the one with the cache, and it works very well. And the reason why they do that is because they say that if they have both, the core chiplet, the cache chiplet on both sides, they get a very limited benefit by doing it that way, but they get a huge cost increase. So you have to kind of balance it, because these are expensive processors. The Ryzen 9 7950X 3D comes with the same amount. It's basically a 7950X with a souped up chiplet, but it costs $699. Now you can get its counterpart for $599. I believe that was actually the recommended selling price of the 7950X. That's the vanilla version without the X3D.
Wasn't it $649 at
right
one
now,
point?
It's running at about $599 at retail. So you pay $100 more.
Yep. All right. Well, shall we dive into our benchmarks and see how we perform?
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Here we go.
So this is the meat of it. I mean, we could run through the different benchmarks, but at the end of the day, this is what it boils down to. Now, there is going to be some variance in which titles will be accelerated by this technology. We'll give you we'll show you a chart that AMD has that has a bunch of different games on there, because it kind of does a good job of a summation of what types of titles see boost. But here, when you look at this, the 7950X 3D is, when you look at the Core i9 or 13900KS, that's also a $699 processor if it's sold at retail, which it rarely does. And that is from Intel. It was intended to keep the gaming crown, but here the 7950X is 12% faster. Even when we look at the overclocks here in a second, it's still 9% faster after you overclock both chips. So they pretty much dispatched with the 13900K with, it's pretty easy. And when we're looking at stock settings, you have to realize that this 7950X 3D is consuming a lot less power. I mean, the power between these two isn't really comparable. I mean, Intel's is running as hot and hard as it can, and this 7950X 3D is just running on one chiplet. During most of these games, almost all of them are running on one chiplet, and the other one is effectively shut down. I mean, the cores are parked. So
you have power data for the CPU from like when you're gaming? Like
not during gaming, no, but it largely follows.
I mean, like TDP is 125
the same
watts.
Trends that we see in general power testing. If we're not doing something that's going to give you fully bandwidth limit, fully bandwidth limited or fully utilizing the core. So when you do something like Handbrake is probably a decent enough proxy where you're gonna peak with the 7950X peak 3D somewhere around 100 watts, and with the 13900K or 900KS you're gonna be running over 200. I mean, it would depend on exactly what kind of a game you're running, but the general take is you're looking at a significant reduction in power. It is significantly more power efficient. Now, one area that you do, there is a bit of a trade-off, though, is the 7950X 3D idles a lot higher. But this has kind of been just a trend. And I actually didn't have the idle numbers in here, but if I open my chart. Anyway, it does idle a little bit higher than Intel. That's going to really depend upon the power mode that you're running in.
Mike, fire off in chat. What gray overlay? I'm not seeing it on my YouTube stream, so I'm not sure what you're referring to. All right, so let's go on. This is your GeoMean of stock running at 1080p. Here's your overclocked version. So you've got multiple different variants of overclocking.
So there are a few different ways that you can overclock. The one that is marked Expo up top is just simply engaging the overclock memory profile for AMD, which is Expo. The kits are a little bit more expensive, not a whole lot, because AMD runs a DDR5 6000 is a sweet spot. Anything over that really isn't even worth bothering. For the Intel chips, they're using DDR5 6800. But as you can see, I mean, you're gaining like what, a percent there from memory overclocking or something like that. You're gaining two frames over all of these titles. It's really not worth bothering with. You could just run the stock. I mean, you're not going to be able to perceive that. And I believe that that's even just one or two titles, right? So
yeah, and like the big cache basically makes your memory speed and performance less critical in games.
exactly. That's the entire purpose of this, is to make the processor less reliant upon of keeping the game data close, so that it's less reliant and doing fewer trips out to main memory, which is a higher latency. The games love low latency. So the whole point of this is to reduce the impact of the memory, and it does a really good job. When you look at the PBO now, PBO, there's a lot to this. What happens is before or prior with the previous gen, the first gen X3D chip using this technology, in AMD did not allow overclocking. They didn't allow you to manipulate power or the ratios. This time they've done limited overclocking. Now you can't change voltages. And there are reasons for that. It's because the cache chiplet has a lower voltage limit, which if you read the review and you go to like page 3 or 4, I think it's 3, I did a bunch of boost testing there, and there we show the difference between the two chips. Like one, the cache chiplet at most will pull 88 watts, but the other one will pull like 140 if you're just disabling one and running your test. So there's a big difference between these chiplets. So there's limited overclockability, and what they're allowing is precision boost overdrive. That's their automated overclock. Do you hear that buzzing?
No.
Okay, good. There's an automated overclock feature there.
If anyone else hears a buzzing, it might be from me, so let me know.
Okay, so there is an automated overclocking feature called precision boost overdrive. You have less control. You can define certain parameters that boost the power limits of the chip. As we can see, that paired with Expo. So whenever you see PBO when I'm testing, and we're also doing overclock memory, that will get you up to 232 frames per second. So you're getting a little bit more of a boost. I think this is more applicable because we're just using a 280 millimeter cooler. It's a one-click operation. If you're going to take the time to click once for Expo, you're definitely going to take the time to click once for PBO. And it sorts it all out, and it does what it needs to do. And it's going to give you the most boost that it can from that cooler that you have attached to it. Whatever thermal headroom is left over is going to extract that. It's going to push the heat up. So if you have a 360 millimeter cooler, you could get maybe a little bit higher. As always with overclocking, your mileage will vary. With X3D, AMD also allows undervolting, which when it comes to this type of a chip could arguably be better. Now, when it comes to applications, it's absolutely better. But when it comes to overclocking, we basically get the same results. If we add undervolting to this, we get the same results. It just kind of changes the rankings in some games a little bit, depending on how much they like peak frequencies, because undervolting will allow you to hit higher frequencies. But it reduces the impact of all core boosts. They won't go as high, but you get higher single core boosts or 2-core boosts. So there's a little bit of a trade-off here and there. At the end of the day, it's basically a wash. I mean, they will have the exact same 232 average for our game thing. Okay.
All right, 99th percentiles, not a whole lot different to say, right? Same
exactly.
story.
Exactly. I don't really see that. There's not a whole lot to pick through here. I mean, if we go back real fast, one thing I will point out is if you look at the 13700K for Intel is very similar to the 13900K, and the 13900KS is like the worst value in chips. So when you're looking at the 13900K comparison, and you're saying, man, I could save a little bit of money compared to the 5800X or the 7900X 3D. Like if you're looking for bang for buck, really the set 13700K is your conversation there. And then you're looking at the 5800X 3D in the same conversation. But there's so many trade-offs with that chip. I still think the 13700K is the better chip for most people over the 5800X 3D, even though it is dirt cheap right now. Anyway, the 5800X 3D is the first instantiation of this technology from AMD, and The 7950X3D just blows it out of the water. Okay.
All right.
Same story on percentiles.
1440p gaming. This is our stock chart. Should we just go to the overclock chart and get
Yep.
it?
I would
All
just
right.
go right to the overclock chart. Again, you're seeing much the same trend. I mean, there isn't really anything here that's going to change your perception of things. Folks do like to see these because they, on high-end systems like this, you're almost certainly definitely going to be gaming at 2560. So that should be, you should take that into consideration if you're building a high-end system, because how much extra do you get? Of course, later in the future, you will get, larger performance boosts if you get a faster GPU. It depends upon how long you're keeping your system. So, I mean, I guess you could make the argument either way, but people who build super high-end systems are probably updating more frequently on their system. But
yeah. So just to, well, I guess these are different games. I was going to say, if you look at our 1080p, oh, that's 99 percentiles there. The drop in performance going to 1440p is not that significant overall, which means we're mostly still CPU limited at 1440p because of the 4090. But 2 years from now, we get a 5090 or an 8900 XTX or whatever the next gen cards are called, right? And so then our 1080p results might become more applicable to higher resolutions. All right. Again, not much to say about the 99th percentiles. You can see these all in the full review. And the 10 FPS difference, they are a slightly different selection of games, so that might skew the 1080p.
Yeah, because yes, we don't use the entire test suite for 1440p because the other games, 3 of them of the 7 tested titles, it's just there's basically no difference. There's nothing to learn, right? It doesn't really show you anything, and it's really time consuming to do a whole bunch of 2560, but to do a bunch of QHD
Tell me about
testing for yes. For CPUs, it's definitely not as important. I mean, 1080p is really the thing that you're viewing. QHD isn't as important. This is just more of a demonstration of the differences.
All right, multi-threaded performance.
Correct.
I'm just going to skip to the overclock again.
Yeah. Yep. Here we see yes, we put the simplified charts in the review without the overclock things to make it a little bit easier for people who maybe aren't as tech savvy or just want a quick view. This overclocked is a little bit more complicated, so we put this in there for the big brains. Now, when you have the 7950X3D, the big thing that you're going to notice right away is that it is not as fast as the 7950X. The 7950X in multi-threaded performance, for some reason I did not color it in this chart, and now that I see that, what a mistake. That is, it's a 673 is a geometric mean of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different workloads here. And actually for that blender, there's 4 different kinds of renders because the different renders work the CPU differently. So you actually have 10 different workloads. This is the geometric mean of those. It is really a good indicator of multi-threaded performance. So the 7950X3D loses quite a bit of steam compared to the 7950X. And this is the drawback. One of the chiplets runs about 500 megahertz slower than the other because it has X3D tech on it. And the X3D tech does little to absolutely nothing to boost applications. I've heard some people say that some types of compiles can benefit like 5%. But I've tested numerous, types of compiles like Godot, LLVM, and Chromium.
7-zip.
Yeah.
7-zip is the one thing that actually can benefit from the big cache, I think.
It does it. Okay, maybe a little bit, but I should probably do a chiplet versus non-chiplet. Overall, basically, nobody buys this for application performance. The number of workloads that would benefit from it from the cache chiplet are so small compared to the vast number where you're going to lose that, unless you're doing one certain 7-zipping all day long, it definitely is not worth it. I mean, even AMD does not position this at all. This chip is positioned for gamers and gaming specifically. The idea, though, is to give you this big boost in performance in gaming while retaining the lion's share of the performance in multi-threaded work. And here it is still a pretty strong processor. I mean, if you're just doing one-click overclocking, which with PBO, you get up to 650. But one thing you really notice here is that we also have for application testing, we also added PBO UV. Undervolting, this is PBO with undervolting applied.
So you can't overvolt, but you can undervolt.
Undervolt, yes. This actually gives you quite a bit more. Gives you a little bit more here, and you're getting up near pretty close, probably enough for most people, to the 13900K at 5.6. That's pretty impressive, considering that this chip is very power efficient. And I mean, you are paying more. On the other hand, you also get the benefit of the gaming. So there are ways that you can do to bring this up. Of course, the 13900KS up at the top at 6.0 on 2 cores, and then the remainder of them on 5.7, and then the E cores at 4.4. I mean, that thing is sucking power like the sun. But you can get more multi-threaded performance. So there is a trade-off there with the 7950X3D if you're running at a bare stock setting.
And if you're not like big on the multi-threaded application performance and you just want the gaming performance, we have the 7800X3D coming next month, which
Correct.
is why it was probably held back, because it's going to be all the performance in games. It will lose the multi-threaded performance because it's dropping 8 cores, but less complexity and cheaper. So
I asked the AMD reps at CES when they announced these chips. Of course, anybody with who knows much about chips and how this works knows that the 7800X3D will be the chip to beat here. It will be the chip that gamers should go for. I don't recommend chips this expensive just for gaming. There's a whole bunch of people with a whole lot of money are going to tell me to shut up, and they're going to do it anyway. But most folks should go for the $449 7800X3D. It's 1 CCD, and even AMD agrees that will give you the overwhelming majority of the gaming performance. I would say at least 95%. That would be my guess. And there's the trick 70 that they could do that would actually make it even better. I'm not sure if they're going to do it. But, yeah.
Are you going to tell us the trick? No.
Sure.
Oh.
So AMD, when they designed the EPYC processors, okay, this CCD, the compute die of Ryzen is the same that they use for the EPYC data center chips. This is important to remember. They use the same die. And anybody who says, oh, it's a different stepping, whatever, shut up. It's the same die. Okay, I know this for a fact. AMD has confirmed it. So on this die, there are these things called GMI links, Global Memory Interconnect Link. And it connects the chiplet to the I/O die. Bam, bam. Now, there are 2 physical GMI connections. The GMI connection is only so wide. Think in terms of a PCIe connection. This is pretty much what it is. It only has so much width. They only use 1 for the client products. There are 2 connections per die. So when you look at the data center products, the EPYC chips, the data center chips, they use 2 GMIs for anything that uses fewer than 6 CCDs. So 4 and below, there are certain SKUs that use both GMIs. So it has access to twice the memory throughput per chiplet. Now, AMD has chose not to do 2 GMI connections for the client processors. I don't know why. My guess, they've never confirmed.
Does the chipset support it? Not chipset, the
I/O die?
Yeah.
I believe that it does, but I could be wrong again. And how hard would it be to use a different, slightly revised version, or just the I/O die from the EPYC chip?
Well, but the I/O die from EPYC's big, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty big. It's chunky.
And it doesn't have the graphics.
Yeah. But the point is there is a means for them to do that and double it. And I think that would be a lot.
Double the memory bandwidth, double the I/O
Yeah,
potential
we're
IO
getting
bandwidth.
off in the weeds. There's
All right,
things
all right.
that they can do, but we don't know what they're going to do.
Let's see, single-threaded performance. Here's your non-overclocked easy chart, and then we'll skip over to the big brain overclocking chart. That's what Paul calls it now.
That's right. So you look here, if you look at 7950X3D PBO only, you are taking a huge hit in single-threaded performance here. It drops quite a bit. If you go from just the vanilla 7950X3D here and you compare it to the 7950X PB, or just the 7950X, the standard version of the chip is faster in single-threaded work. If you do just PBO, you lose a ton of performance.
Why would you lose performance with PBO on single-threaded?
This has been a long-standing problem with PBO. PBO you will lose single-threaded performance because it increases. It basically focuses on multi-core boosts. It's increasing the power limits, and for whatever reason that the implementation that AMD has done, PBO is notorious for this. It will lose performance in single-threaded work when you engage it. It's really focused on multi-threaded work. The main problem with it, typically almost always the drop is a little bit. It's like 4 or 5%. With the X3D chip, though, man, you can see it's a big drop. So a curious thing. But if you use undervolting here, you actually gain a little bit. So this is a demonstration of where undervolting is actually very useful.
I mean, like your PBO numbers on the 7900X, the 7950X, those are both at least fractionally higher than the stock clocks.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like, is there potentially some glitchiness, bugginess with how it's targeting threads or something?
When you look at it with the AM5 platform, we started to see small gains, but everything on AM4, you would not. You would see a regression in PBO almost always. I mean, it depends, but even any gains would be small single percentage, but you would see regressions a lot in single-threaded work. And this is by no means anything new, but with AM5, it is better because they improved their power delivery, and it could be something with thread targeting. I'm not sure. Yeah. It's just a long-standing thing. But with the 7950X3D, you can see it's a big dump. It's a big drop.
Yep. Yeah, like that's about 10%, something like that. All right. That takes us through the benchmarks. We got a few other things to discuss with the platform and how they do this thread targeting. We can quickly run through these.
Here, I mean, AMD is just saying, hey, we're supporting our chipset until at least 2025. The big thing is AMD is committing to supporting this chipset until we get a new revision of memory. This is kind of what they say off the record-ish. I mean, they haven't written it down, but they say basically the constraining factor is when do we move to DDR6? So they're saying at least 2025. If we don't see DDR6 until beyond then, DDR4 was around a long time. So that's why you saw AM4 around for a long time. So DDR5, they're planning to basically run this platform through DDR5. We know DDR6 will not be here until 2025 at the earliest. So they're saying, hey, that's where we'll support it through DDR or 2025. That is an advantage. Now Intel's current platform will have one more generation of chips. So, we could see this go further. There's more performance headroom for these boards. A big problem with when they went from things like the 3950X to the 5950X with the high core count chips at the end of the AM4 platform, they didn't have a lot of overhead with power. They pretty much were tapped out. So you didn't get real big gains. That will change with this platform. The reason why the boards are so expensive is because the power is built like a tank. There's a ton of power, really unneeded right now, in some respects.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with like Zen 5, right?
That it will.
Yeah, this is. I have to keep my numbers straight. Yeah, we're on Zen 4, so Zen 5 maybe next year or something. What's that going to bring to the table? How will it improve things? We saw with the 5800X3D that you could run that thing on an original X370 board and not really lose much in performance compared to the X570 just because of that big old cache. We'll see. We'll have to see what Zen 5, maybe even Zen 6 bring to the table in terms of changes. I don't know, Zen 6, DDR6, that sounds like a good transition point.
Yes, that would be nice. So there you go. That's an advantage of the AMD platform. If you look at the folks who bought a 5800X back in the day, or excuse me, an 1800X, Ryzen was just 6 years old. Last week? So, or the week before. It very recently, 6 years old. The folks who bought that first gen platform, God bless their soul, because that was rough. They could theoretically drop a 5800X 3D in there. Now, how well it'll work, I don't know.
That assumes your motherboard stayed functional. I had at least 3 of my X370 boards die.
Yeah, but you look at it, the X370 is like any platform. The first revisions of the boards are going to be really rough, but the ones that they sold, the last revisions, the newest ones of those, should be pretty decent. Anyway, point being, it's a heck of an upgrade one way. So 6 years later, drop a huge upgrade in performance in there. So that's it.
Yeah, and we're looking at least 3 or 4 years of AM5.
Okay, this here just shows curve optimizer. Here, when they're saying PBO plus curve optimizer, that's PBO and undervolting. I call it UV because I think that UV is a more common term than curve optimizer. Curve optimizer is UV.
All right. We already saw those numbers earlier.
Okay. Here we go. We can go past this. Somehow
we talked about overclocked already.
Yep.
See, we talked about, should we talk about the architecture and this stuff before or after the benchmarks? But
yeah. Okay, here's the important part, and this is the part that is still generating some controversy from folks and probably bears some further testing from us. So keep your eyes peeled. This is something I'm working on as time permits over the weekend. The AMD is targeting, they have a system whereby they're targeting games at that specific cache, but they're also disabling a bunch of cores effectively by parking them. Now, how does it determine how to do that? Now, how does this impact performance in applications? They're using Xbox Game Bar. Xbox Game Bar triggers game mode. Now, Windows Game Mode has a very tortured history. And I mean, I had disabled this for many years, especially when it was new, when we tested.
You had to explicitly enable it for this, right?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I did. Yes, because game mode can get a little bit wonky. The idea really is if you have a high-end system or even a medium system, it shouldn't do a whole lot. Now I am definitely hearing
I'm going to unplug my mic and plug it back in. That sometimes helps. So bear with me.
All right. So with the, game mode has been known to cause problems because what it does is it deprioritizes background tasks when the game is running. And really, the only place where you're going to get a ton of benefit from this would be Core i3 or below, or Ryzen 3 and below, very low-end systems. On higher-end systems, because it deprioritizes those tasks that these big processors like a Core i9 can do just fine in the background, or Ryzen 9, like they're laughing at your multitasking. Unfortunately, it deprioritizes those applications and it creates lower performance. So this can be bad on higher end systems. Now they've ironed out most of the kinks, but it's been a long time since I've messed with game mode because, we're an enthusiast site and our focus is typically above Core i5. So, how much of a performance impact this has and the fact that they're shutting down one CCD, there's just a lot of chances here for this to cause some weird situations. So what we're going to do is simulate some of these weird situations. But you'll have to stay tuned for that testing. These things take time. For now, this is how they do it. You install a new chipset driver, and it installs a provisioning driver, a PPM provisioning file driver. And this, slide describes it pretty well. When they do this, it targets the threads at a certain chiplet to improve the performance because you want that game running on the cache chiplet. Now this, under normal circumstances, is all, let's just say, for instance, that both CCDs are turned on fully. It's still going to limit the game to the cache chiplet. That is the idea. So even if you begin running something else, it's, then it's going to expose the whole processor. And those things can spill over onto that other CCD, like OBS or something like that that's running in the background, or Twitch. Like if you're watching a YouTube stream while you're gaming, you've got Twitch on, watching someone else game, which my son does all the time. It's the strangest thing, but whatever. This ensures that it's still running, but the game's still on that CCD. How well that works in application, I'm experimenting with. So then that's part of it. And if you go over to the other one.
Next slide.
Yeah,
yes.
Sorry. Then you have this, which also dynamically changes the rankings of the cores. During normal times, how this works is AMD on all of its processors right now, it's current gen processors, it ranks the cores based upon frequency, because not all cores can hit the peak frequency. Some cores are faster than others. And they spec their chips that way, which is something that Intel, for years and years and years, nobody did. AMD, well, yeah, unless it was like turbo boost throughput. So this is effectively like turning that into the base spec. So they target the cores based upon frequency first. Once they see that a game is running, now the chipset driver flips it and says, nope, because the chiplet with cache is slower. They're going to say, nope, we're just going to go by which ones have cache. Those are now the prioritized threads. So that's the ins and outs of how it works. There are a bunch of different services that run in the background, but for most people, they're not going to really worry about it. They're going to install the chipset driver, ensure that they're on the balanced power mode, and then game. The Xbox Game Bar does not detect all games. There are a few that it's not familiar with, or for whatever reason aren't on the KGL list. And when they're new, they won't be. However, you can go into the Xbox Game Bar and tell it that whatever is running that's in the foreground is a game. It will list it. You can even do it with applications. You can do SimBench R23. You'll see it right there if you have SimBench open, and it's the application in focus. When you open it, it will show it, and it will have when you open the game bar, you hit Windows G. And it opens the game bar, and you go into the little settings icon, and you'll see it'll say app currently running, and then it has a checkbox to recognize this as a game. And you do that, and bam, it's good.
Got to set my Photoshop to being a game.
Yeah, you can do this during registry hacks with registry hacks and all these complicated things, but I see no reason why you would do that unless you just really don't want to use Game Bar. And therein is something. There's another way of doing this without using Game Bar or game mode, but that's complicated.
I mean, that's what Linux would have to do when it, like right
exactly.
now. Right now, yes. Linux is not benefiting from X3D.
Exactly. That 0.1% of gamers are not getting the benefit of it.
I bought it a 7950 X3D so I could run games on Linux, said no one. All right. This is your asymmetric chiplet design. We've already talked a lot about this.
Okay. Confused Council has a question. That is because the 5800X3D does not support curve optimizer. Maybe they added it after support, but undervolting support is new with 7950X3D. I believe that it was not enabled with the 5800X3D.
So you have to go
back. They
and
definitely did not allow PBO, that's for sure. They unlocked new overclocking features with the new series. So if it is enabled for the 5800X3D, perhaps that was added post-launch.
Yes, that's what he's saying. It was added at the end of last year.
Oh, okay, yeah, and this might be via some sort of unofficial addition by a motherboard vendor, which means it actually might not work how they did. But I mean, now you're going to send me off to some research on this, but
start down the rabbit hole.
That is why. I mean, there are a lot of hacks from the motherboard vendors that we typically don't test, like Combo Strike. I know they MSI added that functionality with the 5800X3D, where it's allowing it to exceed basically the safe thresholds of the cache chiplet. And hey, I'm all for going past those. That's what overclocking is about. But in some cases, it's a little bit sketch. sketchy when they're doing hybrid bonding, because the temperature limits with that can cause that to become hybrid bonded. So like it's a little bit more dangerous. But hey, yeah, I'll look into it. Thanks for the heads up. I do know that there are some methods, but we typically don't use those because I deem them to be a little bit sketchy.
All right, we have.
Because then you're going to come back and ask me, "Hey, Paul, why did you tell me to buy my chip?"
Yes. So then this is the last thing to really show. These were AMD's own provided benchmarks. We showed our overall geometric mean averages, but you can see here across, this is a fair selection of games, 20 or so. And there are a couple where, the drop in CPU frequency did impact them. Strange Brigade and CSGO, both of those, at least in my experience, are probably running in the like 400 plus frames per second range, and are probably more CPU clock speed limited. And so, yeah, it wouldn't be too surprising to see a very slight drop with the X3D.
And yes, and those game engines, just for whatever reason, do not benefit from having that. And in my opinion, a lot
CSGO
of
DX9 engine from like a decade ago.
Yeah. I mean, hey, CSGO's already doing a lot. I mean, I don't know how much it really matters. I see I don't have CS:GO in my game test suite, and I always debate this internally with myself about CS:GO because it is so popular. But at the same time, I hate to benchmark things that are getting up over 200, 300 frames per second, because what am I really telling you? What are we really learning? Oh, look, it runs just as stupidly, ridiculously fast with this as it does with everything else. I want the benchmarks to have at least some meaning. But then again, it's popular. I acknowledge that.
And then I think this is one of two slides. The other slide, I don't know what.
Yeah, one of these I believe was with the
13900K. There we go.
Yeah, there we go. That's against the 13900K. The other one shows you basically the uplift. I don't like this chart as much because I don't trust AMD's
Intel settings
of the 13900K just as much as I don't trust Intel's benchmarks of the 7950X3D. I mean, they'll both just have to forgive me, but I don't trust it. Now this I trust.
Yes.
Most.
Watch Dogs Legion. That's interesting. That's the biggest gain. That one does. I've noticed with 8 GB cards that you can start running into issues, but even then, yeah.
In the spirit of this, when I look at our test suite, I look and I say, hey, man, it seems like I have quite a few games that are falling on this big gain side. So I did do 5 more games that fall a little bit more on it doesn't get anything from it. Like, was it Grand Theft Auto? I added them in a table beyond what we normally do. Down on the gaming page, you can find those, and I reference it at the top. Hey, there's some other games in there that may not benefit much, because I feel like we're weighted more towards games that benefit. But when you look at at the CPU test suite that I run, compared to some of the other big outlets that test CPUs, be they on YouTube or on things, we are very heavily weighted towards newer games and newer engines. So those newer games and newer engines do tend to benefit more. I think that's a safe statement. From the 3D V cache. So I do want to show both sides of the coin. So we did some testing with some games that maybe don't benefit as much, or just, hey, they're different games, expanding our range to show them. I'm always debating both with myself and asking Jared for advice on things that we should include or not include. This is an ongoing thing.
I'm just looking at these games for my GPU benchmarks. I'm currently running 15 games. I'm like, I only have 5 of these. Watch Dogs Legion, Warhammer 3. Oh no, that's Dawn of War. I used Total War Warhammer 3. So that's not on here.
Yeah, we had Watch Dogs Legion in here for on my test suite for like 2 years, but then they started doing all these weird game updates and stuff all the time that makes it really hard to keep up with it. And I actually dropped it. So, what this benefits, it doesn't benefit, has nothing to do with our game selection. I've been running the same suite for 6 or 8 months, well before this. But we like to try. I like to try to keep it balanced. You know, we're trying to get a mix of APIs like DX11, DX12, Vulkan.
Yeah, they don't
It's
have
hard
Red
to have
Dead
any
Redemption
mix of
2.
Vulkan. Anything that runs Vulkan will run in Vulkan because there's so few. But you know, we want different APIs, and then you have to take into consideration, hey, also, how old is the game? Because I don't want a whole bunch of things like CS:GO, unfortunately. But then I also look at what's hot in the Steam chart, the most played, because you know, come on, how important is it if it's some game nobody plays?
So
You know, like Ashes of the Singularity is
speaking of games that are popular, I was looking at Hogwarts Legacy. You know, at one point it was a 500,000 people playing it. I was like, man, that's just on Steam. Maybe I should add it. I started trying to play that game, and actually, like, I've had more crashes of my system with that game than
that's the main thing I hear from people is how terrible that game is.
it's crazy. Like
the game
4090.
is the engine is trash.
Yeah,
and
it works, and then it doesn't.
And this is another consideration that I have to take into consideration when we're selecting CPU benchmarks, is if the game is too new. I am very heavily weighted towards new titles compared to all of it. Just the other day, I actually compiled a list of some of the other big names that do this on the YouTubers, the two biggest CPU competitors that I have. And we are way, way more modern in our choice of selection. But at the same time, I can't go too new because, as Jared can tell you, when a game is new, we get
driver updates and driver updates.
A million driver updates, and there are a million game updates that we can't stop. You can't prevent Steam from doing it. If you don't install the update, you can't do it. And every time there's game update, we have to retest all of them. And you know, I'm maintaining lists on like our CPU hierarchy. It's a pain. So it's got to be new, but not too new, and it definitely can't be too old. Like, we're not just throwing darts at the wall.
Is my microphone buzzing again?
It was.
Gosh.
We're not just throwing darts at a board. There's a lot of different considerations. So anyway, there you go. That's why we included this chart. And typically, I would never include a chart from a third party.
All right. I've unplugged and replugged my microphone again. I need to switch microphones, clearly. My Blue Yeti has apparently done as much as it's going to do. I don't know if it's the cord or the microphone itself, but I think that's it for our show. Do we have any other questions over here that we need to?
This is a decent question.
Whoa, she hates monitors over 24 inches? What is wrong with kids these days?
Those crazy kids. Hey,
I've got a 32-inch monitor behind me that I really, really like the extra size.
They're saving confused council money.
That's true.
Well, I guess that this is always the question. And, 1920 by 1080 is always such a big measure that we use because we're trying to specifically expose GPU bottlenecks. This would depend upon how much money CPU, excuse me. Yes, thank you. CPU bottleneck. This would depend upon what kind of class of video card that you're using and how long you plan on keeping the system. Does it make sense? Maybe not as much sense, especially with 4K, with today's cards. But I mean, now we're getting to this point to where we are CPU limited with games. I mean, come on, Jared, help me out here.
If you have a 4090,
it's like 5 different variables that change.
Yeah, like I guess if she's doing, well, you say 1080p, 2K, 4K on a 24-inch. Oh, she's limited.
Does it make sense for 1080p gaming? If you have a 4090.
I mean, if you want to make sure you are not GPU limited, and I mean, if CPU limited, and you have a monster GPU, sure. But like, if you're running a 3060 something relatively sane, I wager the uplift from a 7950X3D or 7800X3D is going to be relatively minimal, even at 1080p. So it's like, if you're chasing higher frame rates and you've got a beefy graphics card, then sure.
Yeah, so 24 inches on the monitor you're leaving out the refresh rate. Is she limited to 60 hertz? Yeah. I mean, if she's doing a 144, the conversation changes, and then you are also looking at 99th percentile You will get better 99 percentile with faster processors.
I mean, if you've
How
got a
much does that
360,
mean to you? You know,
you got a
how much-
480 hertz 1080p monitor, or 360 hertz even, or 240 hertz. The thing is like there's so many games that, regardless of your CPU, are not going to hit 240 frames per second. You know, it's like if you play CSGO or Dota 2 or these popular esports games, then some of those will hit those super high frame rates, and those can use your refresh rate. But I mean, this is a 240 hertz 4K monitor behind me, and there's like, even with DLSS 3 doing frame doubling, most games don't come anywhere near 240 hertz.
yeah.
So
there's a lot of variables.
he says
there.
it's a 300. So I mean, maybe she is an esports gamer. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
if you're
get
chasing
it.
those higher FPS, why
Get
not?
it. And I'm sure that she's going to update her GPU. If you're using that kind of a monitor, it tells me that you're probably pretty serious about what you're doing on gaming.
Go for it.
But no, don't get the 7950X 3D, people. I'm sorry if I haven't been clear about this. Wait for the 7800.
He did say the 7800X 3D earlier.
Yes,
So
excuse me.
yes.
Yeah, I'd wait. Yeah. 7950X 3D for like 99% of the population. Do not buy it.
DaVinci Resolve. I don't think.
No, we have not.
We use
No, I
that.
have not. We
It's
did
a
some
video
Photoshop
encoding.
and stuff like that. Yeah.
All right. That about does it.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend, and we will see you next time.